Imagine getting a phone call at 2:47 in the morning and somehow already knowing, before a single word is spoken, that your entire life is about to change forever. That's exactly what happened to me. My name is Blake, I'm 38 years old, a former Marine who served 3 tours in Afghanistan, and until that call came through, I genuinely believed my hardest days were already behind me. I was wrong. When the officer on the line told me my wife Harper had been involved in an incident and was being rushed to Sacred Heart Medical Center, I didn't process the words fully. I just started driving, calling her phone repeatedly, leaving voicemails I somehow already knew she'd never hear. My hands shook on the wheel in a way they never had during actual combat. Nothing I'd trained for prepared me for this kind of fear. I reached the hospital in under 3 hours, a drive that should have taken 4, and found Detective Sarah Chun waiting for me in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and dread. She told me Harper had stopped for gas off Highway 26 around midnight when 5 individuals approached her at the pump. There had been an altercation. She'd been stabbed multiple times before the attackers fled. A witness called emergency services, and paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. I asked if she was alive. The detective said she was in surgery, that the medical team was doing everything possible. Then I asked about our baby, the daughter we'd already named Lily Rose, due in just 12 weeks. The silence that followed answered the question before the detective's words confirmed it. The trauma had been too severe. Doctors had been forced to prioritize saving Harper's life over our daughter's. I don't remember my knees giving out, but I remember the wall catching me. The detective explained that surveillance footage showed 5 men wearing motorcycle club vests, believed to belong to a gang called the Iron Wolves. When I insisted on seeing the footage myself, she hesitated before finally showing me. I watched my gentle, kind-hearted wife, someone who volunteered at animal shelters and cried during sad movies, get surrounded at a gas pump. I watched one of the men say something to her, and I watched her expression shift from fear into something closer to recognition, as if she somehow knew him. Then came the knives. I watched her try desperately to shield her stomach as they attacked her repeatedly, watched her collapse, and watched all 5 men calmly walk to their motorcycles afterward, laughing like they'd just finished an ordinary errand. A trauma surgeon named Dr. Reyes eventually found me and explained that Harper had lost a massive amount of blood, with multiple stab wounds penetrating her liver, stomach, and intestines. The next 72 hours would determine whether she survived at all, and even if she did, recovery would be long and difficult in every sense. When I finally sat beside her in the ICU, surrounded by machines keeping her alive, I noticed her wedding ring was still on her finger. They hadn't taken that from her. I held her hand carefully, terrified of causing her pain even in her unconscious state, and promised her quietly that whoever did this would face consequences. Then, for the first time in 4 years, I picked up my phone and called a man I'd sworn I'd never need again. My father answered on the 3rd ring. All I could manage to say was that I needed him. That single admission was about to pull resources into this fight that the Iron Wolves never saw coming. Resources built from money, connections, and a private security network most people only read about in headlines. What none of us knew yet was just how deep this attack really went, or that the reason behind it stretched back 5 years into Harper's past, to a secret she'd never once shared with me. The hospital room felt smaller after that phone call, monitors beeping louder in the silence that followed. By dawn, my father Preston Morrison arrived, tall and silver-haired at 68, accompanied by his lawyer, Eliza Grant. We hadn't spoken in any real sense since I enlisted, instead of accepting the life he'd planned for me, but desperation doesn't care about old grudges. He asked me to walk him through everything, and when I finished, he leaned forward and told me something that surprised me. He recognized the name Iron Wolves immediately, an outlaw motorcycle club heavily involved in methamphetamine distribution, chop shops, and protection rackets, with roughly 40 active members and ties stretching south toward cartel networks. His security firm tracked threats like this constantly. Eliza had already requested the full security footage and witness statements through legal channels, faster than waiting on the police department alone. Detective Chun returned later, looking exhausted, with preliminary identifications on 3 of the 5 attackers. Victor Kane, 36, an enforcer with a history of assault and weapons charges. Kyle Reese, 28, a prospect trying to earn full membership. Logan Pierce, 41, the club's treasurer with a prior money laundering conviction. Enhanced audio from the footage revealed Victor had said something to Harper before the attack began, something about a brother. That detail stuck with me. My father offered his team's help tracking financial connections, but Chun made clear this remained a police investigation, though Eliza left her card anyway, offering resources at no cost. What happened next changed everything. My father's investigators discovered court records from 5 years earlier, an assault case at the exact same stretch of highway. The victim who testified and helped convict a man named Tommy Kane, Victor's brother, was Harper. Tommy had received 12 years and died in prison under circumstances officially ruled suicide, though rumors suggested otherwise. Harper had never told me any of this. The woman who flinched during horror movies had once stood alone in a courtroom and testified against a violent criminal, then buried that entire chapter to protect the peaceful life we'd built together. Victor had waited 5 years, planning this moment, targeting her the moment she seemed happiest and most vulnerable. My old platoon sergeant, Evan, arrived that same day after receiving my message, and within hours he'd mobilized our old unit, men bound by shared combat experience rather than family blood. We set up a discreet operations base in an industrial storage unit, equipped with surveillance gear and secure communications funded quietly through my father's resources. Our objective wasn't vengeance in the traditional sense. It was documentation, building an evidence trail so complete that no lawyer or corrupt official could make these men disappear the way the system had failed to hold them accountable before. Grant analyzed financial records, showing the Iron Wolves laundered millions through legitimate-looking motorcycle repair shops. Hunter worked social engineering angles, seeding doubt and paranoia within the gang's own online circles. Colin managed aerial surveillance, watching their movements from above. Then a threatening text arrived on my phone from an unknown number, warning that Harper should have stayed quiet and that more violence was coming. Evan crushed the burner phone under his boot without hesitation. They knew we were already moving against them. As dawn broke over Portland, our drones lifted into the sky, watching Victor's crew scatter like they sensed the walls closing in. What none of us realized yet was how deep the corruption actually ran, reaching all the way into the local sheriff's department itself, and that the real fight for justice was only just beginning to take shape. The sheriff's department corruption ran deeper than anyone expected. Deputy Felix Harlan, the same officer who'd handled Harper's original case 5 years earlier, had received monthly payments disguised as consulting fees from the Iron Wolves. His bank records showed $8,000 flowing in every month, a corrupt arrangement that had protected the gang and buried evidence for years. Evan pinned Harlan's photo to the operations wall, connecting the dots. This deputy had squashed witness tips and shielded Victor's family from real consequences long before Harper ever became a target. FBI Special Agent in Charge Donovan entered the picture when my father's connections opened federal doors. The evidence we'd compiled, drone footage, financial trails, social media fractures within the gang, transformed this from a local street crime into a full racketeering case. Interstate trafficking elevated everything to federal jurisdiction. Prosecutor Natalie Voss confirmed that Harper's testimony would serve as the linchpin connecting Victor's premeditated revenge to the broader criminal enterprise. Kyle Reese cracked first, confessing that Victor had stalked Harper for 6 months, scraping social media for information, planning the attack as payback for his brother's death in prison. Meanwhile, Harper's condition remained critical. Complications from her injuries led to emergency surgery when internal damage worsened unexpectedly. I sat beside her through every update, watching her fight a battle just as real as the one happening outside those hospital walls. When she finally woke enough to speak, she confirmed what the case files suggested. She'd never told me about Tommy Kane's trial because she wanted our life together free from that shadow. She thought it was over. She was wrong, and so was I, forever assuming the past stays buried just because we choose not to look at it. Raids began hitting multiple locations simultaneously. FBI SWAT teams breached the Iron Wolves chop shop, arresting members mid-operation while disassembling stolen motorcycles. Ledgers recovered from the scene revealed connections stretching far beyond Portland, implicating over 200 members nationwide in a network moving millions through cartel-linked drug trafficking. Mason Holt, a Wolves vice president who appeared clean on paper, was caught fleeing his property with a laptop containing spreadsheets detailing the entire criminal enterprise. Harlan eventually broke down during interrogation, admitting the gang had controlled him for years through threats against his own family. Victor Kane remained elusive throughout this escalating collapse, slipping through initial raids and relocating to a fortified rural compound near the Washington border. My father made a decision that shocked even me, deploying a private security team, former military contractors experienced in exactly this kind of operation, to establish a legal perimeter around the property. This wasn't vigilante justice. It was documented, lawful pressure applied alongside federal investigators, buying time while evidence continued mounting against everyone involved. Media coverage exploded overnight, turning our private tragedy into a national conversation about corruption, gang violence, and what happens when the system fails the people who trust it most. And still, Victor remained one step ahead, refusing to accept that his empire was crumbling around him. The compound near the Washington border became the final stand, though nobody inside seemed ready to accept that reality. Thermal imaging from our drones showed roughly 15 people moving inside, weapons stacked, panic setting in as escape routes were quietly sealed off one by one. My father's contractors maintained a strict perimeter on legally purchased land, never crossing into confrontation, simply cutting off options while federal agents prepared for a coordinated breach. Prosecutor Voss insisted every step remain documented to avoid any accusation of overreach, and Agent Donovan reluctantly agreed the private security presence had actually forced a cleaner surrender than a direct assault would have allowed. Media coverage reached a fever pitch during this standoff. Footage of armed contractors ringing the property while floodlights illuminated frightened bikers stumbling out with their hands raised became the defining image of the entire case. Headlines called it a private army confronting a criminal empire, and public sentiment shifted entirely in our favor. Donations poured into victim support funds, and hashtags demanding justice for Harper trended nationally. Inside the hospital, Harper watched these developments in near silence, tracking the story that had upended her life play out on muted television screens, occasionally squeezing my hand when a particular update landed. Then came the twist nobody anticipated. Quinton Reyes, a national-level Wolves figure who technically owned the compound, surrendered as a decoy, allowing precious hours for Victor to slip away entirely undetected. 18 holdouts were arrested at the property, but Victor himself had vanished on an all-terrain vehicle before dawn, disappearing into rugged backcountry terrain. A final threatening message reached my phone from an unknown number, asking mockingly if I truly believed any of this was over. It confirmed what we already suspected. Victor's ego wouldn't allow quiet defeat, and he intended to keep fighting even as his entire organization collapsed around him. Financial devastation followed quickly regardless of his absence. Asset freezes crippled Wolves' bank accounts. Motorcycle repair shops used for laundering money were shuttered by federal marshals. Cartel wire transfers connected to the organization were severed entirely. Grand jury proceedings moved forward, eventually indicting 47 members on charges ranging from racketeering and conspiracy to attempted murder and interstate trafficking, with Harper's stabbing positioned as the centerpiece of the entire prosecution's premeditation argument. Victor was eventually located near the Canadian border after switching to a snowmobile, caught only after a pursuit involving spike strips and a dramatic crash that left him stranded in freezing conditions until federal agents dragged him into custody. Watching that arrest unfold on a command center monitor brought no real satisfaction, just a strange, hollow quiet. My father stood beside me and said something that stuck with me long afterward, that justice isn't about revenge burning you down, but about building walls strong enough that these people could never return. Harper's fight, however, the physical and emotional recovery still ahead of her, remained far from finished, and the courtroom battle awaiting Victor promised to reveal secrets even darker than what we'd already uncovered. Victor Kane's arrest didn't bring closure so much as a cold, quiet finality. Within days, the federal indictment landed like a hammer, charging 47 members of the Iron Wolves with conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, drug trafficking, and witness intimidation. But the charge that mattered most to me personally was simple: attempted murder in aid of racketeering, with Harper listed as the victim. The preliminary hearing felt like stepping into a fortress. Security surrounded the courthouse, a visible reminder that the Wolves had no allies left on the outside. Victor walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his leather vest, looking smaller than I remembered, stripped of the power that once made him feel untouchable. When his eyes found mine across the courtroom, he smirked out of habit. I simply stared back until he looked away. Prosecutor Voss built her case methodically, opening with the gas station footage, then playing recorded evidence of Mason Holt betraying Victor, followed by Deputy Harlan's confession detailing years of corruption. She told the judge plainly that this wasn't a robbery, but an execution ordered by a man nursing a 5-year grudge against a woman brave enough to tell the truth. Bail was denied within minutes. That night, sitting beside Harper in the rehab wing, I told her the news. She asked quietly if it was really real, if he could no longer buy his way out or intimidate a jury into silence. I assured her the evidence was overwhelming, and that my father's legal team was watching every step the prosecution took. Plea deals began falling like dominoes over the following weeks. Mason Holt accepted 25 years to avoid a life sentence. Quinton Reyes took 40. But Victor's pride wouldn't allow him to fold, insisting on a full trial instead, wanting a stage rather than quiet surrender. My father saw this as an opportunity rather than a setback, pointing out that a public trial would place every ugly detail on permanent record, ensuring Victor spent the rest of his life in a cage with no ambiguity left for appeals. Months passed in a blur of physical therapy sessions and legal updates. Harper slowly relearned how to walk without wincing, while I learned how to sleep without checking the locks obsessively. When sentencing arrived for the lower-tier members, Kyle, Logan, and Tristan, I attended alone since Harper wasn't ready yet. Standing to deliver my victim impact statement, I abandoned my prepared notes entirely and spoke plainly, telling the judge they'd taken my daughter and tried to take my wife simply because she once stood up for a stranger. I told them plainly they'd been wrong to believe fear ruled this city. Maximum sentences followed for each defendant. As Kyle was led away, he looked at me not with hatred, but with fear, understanding finally that the old rules protecting men like him no longer applied. What remained was Victor's trial itself, and a courtroom surprise witness about to reveal exactly how calculated this attack against Harper truly had been. Victor's trial became something closer to theater than justice, his defense attorney attempting to paint Harper as a confused victim, and my father's private security team as an overreaching militia harassing innocent motorcycle enthusiasts. It was a laughable strategy, but a dangerous one too, since all it would take was a single juror buying into that narrative of government overreach. Then, on the 4th day, the prosecution called their surprise witness. Deputy Felix Harlan walked into the courtroom, stripped of his badge, smaller and more broken in his prison uniform than I'd imagined. Prosecutor Voss asked him directly whether Victor Kane had explicitly ordered the attack against Harper. After a moment of hesitation, Harlan confirmed it, admitting Victor had called him 3 weeks beforehand, saying he'd found the witness who testified against his brother 5 years earlier, that she was pregnant, and that he wanted to send a message. When Voss asked what that message was, Harlan's voice cracked as he repeated Victor's exact words, that he wanted the bloodline ended, that he wanted her to watch it happen. Victor lunged across the courtroom before restraints stopped him, the mask of a misunderstood outlaw shattering completely in front of the jury. The verdict came back within 4 hours, guilty on every count, including attempted murder, conspiracy, racketeering, and witness retaliation. The judge sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole. I didn't feel triumphant walking out of that courtroom. I just felt lighter, like a weight I'd been carrying since that first phone call had finally lifted off my chest. The real challenge waiting for us wasn't in any courtroom though, it was at home. Harper returned to a house that felt too large and too silent, the nursery door remaining closed for months since neither of us could bring ourselves to open it. She spent her days relearning how to trust her own body again, jagged scars across her abdomen serving as permanent reminders of what she'd survived. Nightmares haunted us both in different ways, hers filled with knives, mine with reaching instinctively for weapons that weren't there. One evening, my old platoon brothers came over for a simple barbecue, no tactical gear, just casual conversation and laughter that had nothing to do with war or gangs. Harper watched hesitantly from the doorway until Evan raised his drink in a toast to the toughest fighter any of us knew. She smiled genuinely for the first time in months and joined us outside. Later that night, I found her standing before the nursery door, hand hovering over the handle. She whispered that she thought she was finally ready. We opened it together. The room smelled like dust and lavender, the crib still empty, but somehow it no longer felt like a shrine to loss, just a quiet space waiting patiently for life to return. Harper picked up a stuffed rabbit we'd bought the day we learned she was pregnant, holding it close while tears fell silently down her face. She told me she missed our daughter every single day, but that we were still here, still ourselves, and that they hadn't won. My father called the next morning announcing he'd established something called the Morrison Justice Initiative, a foundation providing legal support and protection for witnesses testifying against gang violence, a permanent answer to the corruption and fear that had nearly destroyed everything we loved. A year after the attack, Sunrise painted Mount Hood in shades of violet and gold, and for the first time, that once-dreaded anniversary date felt different. I woke to find Harper already up, coffee and bacon filling the kitchen with warmth instead of silence. Walking past the nursery, I noticed the door standing open, the crib no longer empty. My father stood at the kitchen island wearing an apron, flipping pancakes and looking simultaneously ridiculous and wonderful. Harper sat feeding our 3-month-old son Leo, her scars visible and unhidden now, worn openly rather than concealed beneath long sleeves. We hadn't replaced Lily, because you can never replace someone you've lost. But we had finally made room again for joy in our lives. That day marked the public launch of the Morrison Justice Initiative, held outdoors at the same overlook where I'd once proposed to Harper years earlier. Hundreds gathered, including families we'd already helped and law enforcement officers who genuinely cared about doing right. Harper stood at the podium with Leo strapped against her chest, addressing the crowd with a steadiness that still amazes me when I think back on it. She told everyone that the Iron Wolves had wanted to silence her, to teach an entire city that fear was stronger than justice, that speaking up meant bleeding for it. She admitted she had bled, that she'd lost her daughter and an entire year to unbearable pain, but she reminded everyone gathered that she was standing there anyway, louder than she'd ever been in her life. The applause that followed wasn't polite clapping, it was something closer to collective defiance finally finding its voice. After the speeches ended, a frightened young woman approached us, admitting she'd witnessed a gang-related crime and was terrified to come forward. Harper didn't hesitate for a moment, handing Leo to me before taking the young woman's hands and promising her she wasn't alone, that we would stand between her and any danger that came looking for her. My father immediately arranged secure transportation and protection, proving that the foundation wasn't just symbolic, but a genuine shield for people who otherwise had nowhere else to turn. That night, sitting together on our porch swing after Leo had fallen asleep, Harper and I watched the city lights below, fully aware the nightmare chapter of our lives had closed, though the larger mission we'd built from it was only just beginning. There would always be other predators lurking in the shadows somewhere, other victims needing someone willing to stand beside them. Harper reminded me that scars never fully fade, but that families, real ones, are forged stronger through fire rather than broken by it. We sat there quietly, armed not with weapons anymore, but with love, purpose, and an unbreakable promise made to a daughter we never got to meet. If this story moved you, hit that like button to show you believe justice should always be served. Subscribe if you want more stories where the good guys don't just win, they dominate, and drop your country or state in the comments so I can see exactly where this story reached. Stay safe, stay strong, and I'll see you in the next one.